Listen. Very smart. Yes, thank you. We are now officially recording for those who want to reference this afterwards or aren't able to join us. So again, Emily Goodson. I'm a white woman. I have shoulder-length brown hair with some blonde highlights. Today, I am wearing a black dress with a collar and short sleeves. I'm sitting at a desk in my living room, and I have a bookshelf with some sunflowers on it behind me. I also have the entrance to my foyer, which has a movie poster in it, which you may or may not be able to see. LA, I live in New York currently, but LA is very near and dear to me. And so I have an old movie poster in the hall, which is kind of cool. The pronouns I use are she, her. And I am a writer and a disability inclusion consultant. So kind of relevant to this community, I started using Culture Amp when I was a baby HR leader, and then eventually grew up into a consultant and started to build the Culture First chapter. So I started the chapters in LA and San Diego, and now do some workshop facilitation here in New York. And this has been a fantastic community for me to grow professionally and personally. So I'm so glad that all of you are here. I currently do some consulting with companies, manager training, but then also some workshops on how to increase disability inclusion, how to create more psychological safety. And then in addition to that, I'm very dedicated to increasing disability representation in the media. So I have done a few things. I'm working on a book right now about dating and intimacy, and disability, 3 things that'll come out next year. So having said all of that, Jessie, let's go ahead and advance. I am going to ground us in 3 main points before we get into the panel. Like Jessie said, we could probably talk about this for the next 5 hours and have this easily be a day-long session, but we're not going to do that. So what I would encourage you to do is, if questions come up during the conversation, if there are things you want to learn more about or do in your organization, jot it down, take a note. We're going to try and answer some questions at the end, but if we don't get to anything, you can connect with any of us on LinkedIn, and we will keep the conversation going. But number one thing that I want us to ground into before we get into the panel is that disability is diverse, and do not make assumptions. So this is a picture I like to use quite a lot on the slide. This is of me and some of my good friends, actually, who co-founded the Culture First San Diego chapter. So my dear friends, Kathy, Maria, Rebecca, and Gary. And the reason I have this screenshot up is because during the COVID-19 pandemic, I spent a lot of time understanding and delving into my identity as a woman with a disability. And that was something I previously hadn't done due to a lot of shame I had and due to growing up in a community that really didn't want to talk about disability. And one of the things I realized during the pandemic was how much I was relying on meeting people in person for them to understand that disability was a piece of who I am. And what I mean by that is, in this screenshot you see from a Zoom meeting, I'm seated in a chair, I'm wearing a hat, I'm smiling, engaging, but there is nothing about my disability that is apparent from this particular Zoom snapshot. Likewise, right now, there's nothing apparent about me as a woman with a disability. There's no disability is apparent to you right now if you're just meeting me over Zoom. Now, if you were to meet me in person, you would probably notice that I walk with a very visible limp. I have about an inch difference between my legs. And I have very limited use of my left arm and hand. This is all from a brain injury I had as a child. And so I say all of this to make the point that disability is diverse, and don't make assumptions, because there are a lot of things that we can't tell just by looking at somebody. And disability is something that changes, right? It's dynamic. So some people are born with a disability. Some people become disabled through an injury or an illness. But disability is, any of us could be disabled at any age, any race, any ethnicity. All disability intersects all diversity. And so that's the first thing I want to ground us in is, there's not one image of what disability looks like or should mean. So number 2, and yes, I am a big fan of Culture Amp, and the reason I'm using some Culture Amp data is because point number 2 is that disability is often overlooked and under-discussed. And if somebody else has a good data set on global kind of engagement data related to employees with disabilities, please let me know. I'd love to use it. But Culture Amp, as far as I know, is one of the few people doing research into or using their data to help us understand how disabled employees feel in the workplace. So this is some data from, if you don't know, so Culture Amp has surveys have been conducted by various companies through Culture Amp for, almost 10 years probably at this point. And they're able to globally compile that data, completely anonymized, and look at it and look for trends and benchmarks. And so the graph that we're seeing here is comparing disabled employees and non-disabled employees. And so the purple color, which is the higher kind of bar in every instance, represents non-disabled employees. And the yellow color represents disabled employees. And so what we're seeing here, these are questions across the bottom of this graphic. These are questions that Culture Amp companies have used Culture Amp's questions to ask their employees. So one is, I feel safe to be authentic. I feel respected. I feel I belong. I feel comfortable sharing about myself. I feel there's equity amongst opportunity and amongst administrative tasks. And on every single one of those questions, and again, this is thousands of data points compiled globally, on every single one of those questions, disabled employees agree or less likely to agree. So for instance, 84% of non-disabled employees say they are safe to be authentic at work. 74% of disabled employees agree. And that's for every question. And so, I think a couple of takeaways from this. Not a lot of people are looking at this kind of data. Like I said, I think that's sort of an overlooked perspective in a lot of organizations and nationally. And then clearly, I think the other takeaway from this work is that we have some work to do because we want everyone to feel authentic, able to be authentic and respected at work. And that's why we're here today. That's why we wanted to do this panel, was to start talking with people about strategies you can employ and awareness you can raise. And these 3 panelists who I'm about to introduce you to are doing tremendous things in each of their avenues. So, please listen to them and think about how you can apply some of these learnings to your own organizations or to your own communities. Okay, so number 1, disability is diverse. We don't make assumptions. Number 2, disability historically has been overlooked and under-discussed. And number 3, take intentional action. So Jessie mentioned this in the opening kind of pillars for the community, but we're not going to make any progress if we don't take intentional action. One of Culture Amp's prompts that sometimes we hear at other events or at Culture First community events is the question, if you really knew me, you'd know. And my answer to that changes, but today I'm going to say, if you really knew me, you'd know that I'm obsessed with Broadway shows and the theater. It's pretty serious. If you're interested, you can look at my TikTok. But the headline for this slide, "Progress is possible, is not guaranteed," is from a current show on Broadway, which is about the women's suffragette movement, but I think it really applies here too, is we're making tremendous progress around hiring more people with disabilities, being more inclusive, building more inclusive cultures, and all three of these panelists are helping us to make progress. But we can't rest, right? We have to figure out what are some iterative steps we can continue to take to raise more awareness and create more inclusion. Growing up, it was certainly a huge detriment to me and my development that nobody in my community wanted to talk about disability or knew how to talk about disability. And, that's not their fault, right? We have to educate others and learn and grow together and make mistakes together. But that's going to take all of us taking action. So number 3 is take intentional action. And this is a data set we will also send out. So this is from Accenture's Disability Inclusion Imperative. And we could talk a lot about this data. We could say a lot about it, which we're happy to do it another day, on another day. But the point I want to call out is the third line. So this is comparing 2018 employment in the US to 2023 employment in the US. And what the data is showing is that in 2018, 4.4 million people of working age with disabilities were employed. And then in 2023, so last year, 6.3 million were. Again, there are a lot of observations that can be made about this, but the one I want to make is, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the rise of a lot of flexible working environments, which is a big benefit to a lot of people with disabilities. When people are able to work from home and have access to assistive technology, maybe they didn't want to ask for before, didn't have access to before, that helps more people to be employed. Or when people, are able to have flexible schedules, that helps more people to be employed. So we're going to get more into, different tips for how you can be more inclusive. But I did want to show this just to show you that more people with disabilities are employed. We are making progress internally at different companies on being more inclusive, but there's always still more to be done. So your 3 points, and then I'm going to introduce you to your panelists. So number 1, disability is diverse, don't make assumptions. Number 2, disability has been historically overlooked and under-discussed. And number 3, we are going to take intentional action just like these 3 are. So with that said, if you're not on mute, let me just ask you to please go on mute.
No, we have designers. Perfect. Yeah. They have fun.
Yeah, if you're not on mute, if you could please go on mute.
So oh, why don't you add this? Why don't you add this? And you're like, okay.
Yes, can you tell who's not on mute? Perfect, thank you. And just quick case in point that I will mention, and then before I hand it over to Ryan, I think if you are trying to be more inclusive in the recruiting process, and you're doing Zoom interviews, it can be really distracting to people if there's background noise, and if people are using assistive technology, it can sometimes be really hard to pick up if there's background noise going on behind you. So just one quick tip for being more inclusive in the recruiting process is if you're doing a Zoom interview, make sure you're somewhere quiet. So if somebody is using assistive tech, it'll pick up what it needs to pick up. Perfect. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to I'm going to let them introduce themselves, our esteemed panelists. We're going to go through 3 questions, and then we'll turn it over to you all for more questions. So first up, my dear friend Ryan, I'm going to let him introduce himself. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. Ryan Wilkes here. I am a white male with brownish red hair, blue eyes, a red beard. I'm wearing a blue shirt and am in my home office. Over my left shoulder, I've got art thing from my in college, and right shoulder a old United ad, which I work at United Airlines. I am the a manager of activations and employee uh, social media on our a global advertising team. I've been at United about 8 years now, and in that time have worked to advocate for our employees with disabilities. I was on the founding a board of our a BRG, a business a resource group that supports our employees with disabilities. And if you I can't tell, I have a mild cerebral palsy that causes a movement on my left side, as well as uh, a, dis- a disfluency it, in my speech, and clearly. So on that note, when I get stuck on a word or a thought, I'll 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 likely I'll pop it in the chat. So I'll watch out for the chat. All right, Dennis, uh, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. My name is Dennis Tran. I am a social impact storyteller, DI speaker, and consultant. My mission is to build a more neuro-inclusive and accessible world where people with disability and neurodivergent can live a meaningful, fulfilling life. I identify as a queer, partially blind, late identified autistic, Asian, neurodiverse Vietnamese American, living with glaucoma and CTSC. Um, and I am wearing a red shirt, black glasses, and have black hair. And am like in my living room, home office, like, and kind of with a blurry background right now. My journey started off like in the disability space. Like I was like partially blind at the age of 17 with glaucoma, affecting my vision, and I struggled with my vision a lot in that time period when there was like not a lot of disability representation or out there in the community during that time. And so 10 years later, in my late 20s, I was diagnosed with autism, and that led into this whole transformation journey where I realized that I didn't want to live life a certain way anymore, and that kind of propelled me into reshaping perspective of how I want to live my life. And knowing with this late diagnosis, it comes at a time when there's more people opening up about disability, and kind of so that's where it kind of got me into the idea of like, hey, there's different way of living, and I don't have to choose to live in a survivalist mentality. And that kind of led me into the whole advocacy journey and navigating a portfolio of careerists like in throughout my 20s and now in my early 30s, as like spanning multiple sectors including technology, philanthropy, healthcare, and digital media. And that just kind of all rooted into like my passion now kind of into kind of empower the disability neurodiverse community to live a more meaningful, inclusive life. And it's kind of like, and more focusedly, I'm also very passionate about the intersectionality and cultural aspect of it, and empowering the AA and HPI community, knowing how the community itself has been very stigmatized, and mental health and disability and neurodiversity have been often was never really discussed in our culture. So I kind of been more want to be able to give back to the community growing up. Now that I have such knowledge and my experience, and now I have been able for the past few years have done some consulting work in media entertainment, and like recent done was in consulting for Blues season 5 of Blues Clues, and you for the first autistic care lavender, and other than that I have done public speaking for corporate environment, ERG groups, and like for nonprofit various organization on fostering belonging, inclusive and intersectionality between Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, like on mental health, disability, neurodivergence, and just like kind of building a neuroaffirming community. I'll pass it over to Ola.
Thank you so much, Dennis. My name is Ola Ojawumi. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman. I'm wearing a black blouse, a white necklace, a bold red lip, and I have long black hair. I'm the founder and director of the education nonprofit Project Ascend. I started this nonprofit in college, and we've provided thousands of dollars in college scholarships to disabled youth, low-income youth, and our work is expansive on a global level. We've distributed grants. We're also a grant making organization, and we've distributed grants to nonprofits and community organizations in specifically in Nigeria, Guatemala, most recently in the Congo, Haiti, and Sudan as well. So, as you can see in the photo, I am wearing a yellow dress and I am seated in a motorized wheelchair. What's different about me is that I acquired my disability later in life as a child. I was 9 years old and I had the heart condition that a lot of athletes have. If you've ever watched the news, there's always a story about an athlete who was great at what they did, and they suddenly dropped dead of a heart condition that they didn't know they had. And the difference was I didn't die. I was told I passed out at a elementary school overnight field trip, and later I was diagnosed with the disease hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And so what's unique about my experience was I remember the expectations of me being so high before I became a disabled person, before I, needed a wheelchair to get around. Once I became disabled, I was deemed useless. And I've spent my life fighting that stereotype. So it went from a diagnosis at 9 years old to eventually becoming a heart and kidney transplant recipient at age 11. I wasn't expected to live to see age 20. And here I am at 33, loving and enjoying life. And a lot of the obstacles that I face inspired me to advocate for disability rights on a political level. And this opened up opportunities for me to work in the Obama White House. I also was a public policy and international affairs fellow at Berkeley. And I'm also a political commentator as well. I've appeared on PBS's Democracy Now! And MSNBC's AM Joy with Joy Reid. In addition, I'm also a writer. I find joy in writing about my struggles because there's so little representation of Black people with disabilities in the disability rights space. So I've written for CNN, NBC News, in addition, the Huffington Post, Self Magazine, and Glamour. I'm just happy to be here with you all, and some of my charity work outside of writing extends to serving on nonprofit boards for celebrities like Lady Gaga and the late General Colin Powell. So thank you for having me and allowing me to share my story.
Oh, well, Ola, weird. I mean, I'm just blown away by all three of you. Every single time I talk with this group, I think is very important to all of us that we show and talk about the intersectionality of disability. And I just am so impressed by this group for a number of reasons. So let's dive into the questions. And Ola, I'm going to start with you. And you actually sort of touched on it a little bit in your introduction. This idea of, once you became disabled, people thought you were, quote unquote, useless. So I'm wondering, whether it's that misconception or other misconceptions, how have you in your professional career worked to overcome different misconceptions or stereotypes of people with disabilities?
I would say clapping back. It's seen as very unprofessional to tell people off or respond to their ableism without the benefit of the doubt or kindness. For example, one of my former managers actually told me, "You're not disabled." And I told him, "That's not for you to decide." I had to explain to him what disability pride was, and that disability isn't this shameful thing. We have this massive community, we have disability pride marches, and so overcoming that stereotype is teaching people, hey, disability is not a bad thing. I'm not running from who I am, and the differences that I have make for a more innovative work experience for all of you. For example, disabled people statistically have higher retention rates in employment, and even challenging the myths of what disability looks like. I'm a wheelchair user who can walk. The reason I use a wheelchair is because I have a muscular disease called mitochondrial disease. So it makes it difficult to walk short distances. I don't walk with a limp, but I will take my wheelchair when it's needed. And so people seeing me walking and then seeing me using a wheelchair and being befuddled. I've been called a fraud. I've been told I'm faking my disability, and having to educate people about what ambulatory wheelchair users look like, and that disability does not come in one shape or form, or that someone is attempting to fool you when they're just trying to make their lives easier. I can't function in the workplace without being able to get from point A to point B. When you're working in the White House, at the drop of a hat, they can tell you, go here, fetch this. Like, one in my first or second week, they actually asked me to go to the Nike store and pick up pick up basketball shorts for one of the staff members who was very close to President Obama to play basketball with him. And I was just like, okay, vroom. If I didn't have my wheelchair, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So instead of, trapping myself in the house and choosing not to work and choosing to conceal my disability forever, I was like, I got to make it public. I have to do what I have to do, regardless of whether people will judge me.
Dennis or Ryan, do you want to hop in on misconceptions?
Yeah, sure. I, you know, looking at me, I was sitting at a desk at the dinner table. You wouldn't expect that I'm the disabled. So that that initial kind of um interaction where, like, it becomes apparent for a long time was, I it caused me a, a, a lot of anxiety, and uh, uh, but then realizing, like, this is the only way I can be, and, like, that's not anything I'd be ashamed of or anxious of. And once I finally able to, you know, stand tall in my uh, disability, and you know, not try to hide it, because it's not going to hide well. Uh, then I was able to. I, I'll take those uh, misunderstandings and stereotypes head on.
Dennis, anything you want to add?
I just want to add that, like, yeah, it's like disability doesn't necessarily have like a specific look. It's the community is very diverse. I'll kind of go into what this much later on, like in the like few question, but I just want to add in that, like, yes, it's like people will always say like, oh, you don't look disabled, or you kind of have this like ableist perspective of like disability, but then at the same time, like you don't really necessarily know like what this person's gone through in their internal world, the internal struggle that kind of shaped them, and it's like and from day to day, like disability can fluctuate just because like you can be like all well and can complete tasks very well in the morning, but then you struggle past during the daytime, your energy level fluctuate and it kind of affect your ability to fluctuate in a day-to-day basis. And I think that allowing flex for the flexibility and that understanding is key to kind of like combat like the ableist aspect and to kind of meet people where they're at in a compassionate way, but also to be able to like challenge the perception of like what it means to be disabled in that way where when you're not just like thinking about like oh like thinking from a deficit lens or thinking about like from a medical model where it's like it's that person's fault for being disabled, they're less than for being different. Just because someone's different or just become appears a certain way doesn't mean that they're incapable. It just means that they're different, and different isn't bad. And as like Ola mentioned, disability isn't a bad word.
Double tap on everything that was said. And it's you all are hitting on so many important points that I wish we had time to go into all of them fully. But I think Dennis, you've talked before about representation in the media, and that's clearly something I'm very passionate about as well, because I know, to Ryan's point, how it affected my anxiety and my shame that I internalized. And I think, that is a very real thing that we as a society can work on. And I think as individuals, Dennis, just as you said, being compassionate, asking questions, not making assumptions, it is so important. And we will send out, there is some data I use. I believe it is out of the CDC, that shows that individuals with disabilities tend to experience 5 times the mental distress of those without disabilities. And so, again, when we're thinking about this intersection, the intersectionality of all of this, it's really important to keep the mental health piece in mind too, as Ryan referenced. So I want to get us into some more tactical strategies that people can employ in organizations. And Ryan, I'm going to come to you first, and then we will pass it off to our other panelists. But Ryan, what advice would you give to employers wanting to create more disability inclusion internally?
Absolutely. That is the, you know, a question that I think uh, 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 I'll type it one moment.
Perfect. And while Ryan's typing that, I just want to call out, hopefully this doesn't embarrass you, Ryan, but I'm going to do it anyway.
You go for it, girl.
Somebody wrote something lovely in the chat about how Ryan has helped them a good deal with understanding disability and working with their son. And sometimes we can have a fun time when he lets me fill in the gaps when a word isn't coming out. And if this person appreciates that you've taught them to be patient and just listen and not fill in unless prompted.
I thank you, Rachel. Anyway, so at United, we are on a journey to become the most accessible. Wait for it. Airline in the sky. Are those words? And we. I recognize that's not a achievement. We can conquer unless we start on the inside with our wait for it, with our If I could spell that, hope, hang on. Wait for it, one moment. Sorry. Hang tight. Anyway, um, uh, so, that's a journey that that wait for the chat one moment. That all right.
And Ryan, if you want to.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. So in that vein and sentiment, my biggest advice, approach to all this is normalizing a disability. I like one moment. I like I all said it's not a taboo or a bad word. And so one way that I do that is I'll type it one moment. Oops. If I could spell, that would help.
And this, what Ryan's about to share is really important. I haven't seen this at any other companies, so definitely pay attention to the chat, because I think this is a massive tip that people can think about employing for themselves or at a company level.
Well, and it's free, it's easy. I mean, it's just like, and you'll see.
You'll see. You'll see.
And
while Ryan is typing that, yeah, he's just finishing up his chat and then it's going to come through. I think, Ryan, you bring up an excellent point about accommodations in general, is that the research shows most of them are free, or don't cost a lot of money. And so when I think, when we're thinking about misconceptions, that's another one that I tend to see with employers, is not wanting to offer accommodations or being afraid they're going to cost a lot of money.
correct. Sorry,
You take your time.
type just as much as I talk.
You take your time.
Bank workers. There we go. That. So I'm putting out there, in everything that I send, just a notice of, hey, I have ICP, I'm gonna stutter, I'm gonna spaz, but you can help me out in this way, or I'll use the chat. And yeah, I'm taking this a very, a personal part of my life, and normalizing that a discussion at work is huge. We also have the a BRG I mentioned it earlier, and the whole goal of that is to advocate for our differently abled uh, employees in whatever way that means. So, our takeaways. I, I'm not being afraid to just. I'll talk about it. Ask the questions that you have. I would rather you ask. I mean, hey, like, how does CP affect your life, or how, how can I'll work with you best? Like, uh, let's have that talk. Rather than you assuming how uh, you can help me. So that was a very long thought to a very short question, but a big one. So hope that helps y'all.
It's very helpful, Ryan. Thank you so much. I really,
Of course.
when I saw Ryan's email signature, I was very touched. I mean, I am very continuously touched by how authentic you are in sharing your story. I'm gonna get emotional. I'm not gonna get emotional today. I'm gonna pass it
Don't
off.
do it. Don't do it.
We're not doing it. Ryan and I grew up together, which we just recently learned. So I feel a very like familial attachment. um, Ola or Dennis, do you all want to share other tips for making the workplace inclusive for people with disabilities? Yes, Ola.
Fire all your ableist managers. Disabled employees are not the liability you think they are. You continuing to have managers that have problems with employees requesting accommodations or continue to say ableist words um are just very much, you can tell, are adamantly against hiring anyone with a chronic illness or verbalizes their discrimination. I mean, there's all sorts of unconscious bias, but with disability, I've learned it's really blatant. Questioning people's intelligence, particularly disabled people. I had a manager speak to me in baby talk. Um, these people need to go. If not fire, suspend. Don't give them the right to hire. Get rid of the toxicity. Like, at the average cost of an accommodation is between $0 to $500. The lawsuit you will get into and end up paying for because you stand by a toxic and discriminatory manager or supervisor will always outweigh the cost of an accommodation.
Thank you. Dennis, anything?
I'll just add on to that, like, yeah, like it depends on where you're at in your career journey. I would say, like, if you're executive, you have the in the position power, like, if you're executive CEO, you kind of have the choice to kind of who you bring onto the team and like the environment. So that's where you kind of have to kind of check in like on your team, like who's ableist and kind of get rid of them, or those type of things, or they'll become a very toxic environment. So I think like the best thing to do is like focus on your culture, how you build your culture to kind of bring in people from all perspective, and diversity as well. And I know disability is just it's a very diverse community as well. So like kind of having different narratives, stories, people, and perspective into their thing kind of help build cultural environment. And I think if you're part of a company as a middle manager, it kind of like in that role where your company is not yet there, but they're kind of still promoting equity accessible, then you're still finding a place to work. The least you can do is you be that boss and that manager, that supportive member to your team member, and to kind of help that having that open communication to who you bring on to your team, and have that channel dialogue to kind of get to know each other and foster that curiosity and learning mindset, and not to have those unconscious bias that ties into it as well. And those are the type of things that, like, I would say, like, it's very helpful in that mindset, but also having creating the safe space for your employee and just being able to like prioritize their own mental health, and that understanding that, like, hey, we're all human first, and not just employee. We're not here just to kind of work grind all the time, and that it's just be able to take care of your employee as well, because like, you know, this may be their only safe space they have because they may not have a strong mental health support system outside of it, and this is probably the only place they're exposed to it as well.
That's really powerful, Dennis. Really, really powerful. You know, that people may really need that support system at work, or may need the training and just the resources. I mean, we don't have time to get into benefits, but I feel like benefits, health benefits, and providing mental health resources are so vital. And there's so many specific benefits we can provide to better help people with disabilities, which we'll not get into because I want to hit on one more very important topic before we go to questions from the group. And Dennis, I'm going to ask you to lead us off here. So, you know, the question of whether to disclose if you have a disability in the workplace is very layered, and it is deeply personal to people. And, you know, no one should be forced to disclose anything they're not comfortable disclosing. But at the same time, we want to create an environment where if people choose to do that, they feel safe speaking up and disclosing or asking for accommodations. So Dennis, what are your tips around how to foster that?
I think in terms of like accommodation and provide support is like without having someone like be openly like unmasking or even like asking for accommodation, is kind of be able to build, it's like building that trust and that culture in the first place. And when you bring on someone like onto your team and stuff like that, it's more so like, do they actually feel safe with you, or do they actually feel comfortable opening up to you? For example, like I had places where, you know, like I was struggling to ask for help. I was struggling to like open up to my manager because I was like, at the time was in my career, I was not necessarily like aware of my autistic or living with hidden disability mental health challenges. So I didn't feel like, you know, I was very early into my career. So it was like I was working for a startup, and it was a place where I was scared to be. I was like, oh, you know, it took me a long time for me to get a job, and I didn't want to lose it because if I disclose my disability, I might get fired. But I may need support in certain aspects of it. Maybe it's just like, hey, I need a ride to go to an event or something like that, but I'm scared to ask for it, or because of my disability, because I'm also low vision, which is like partially blind, but I could still do everything else. I just don't drive. So that's where it's like very hard to ask for help. So I'm very selective of it. But then when I do see like how supportive when my coworker in my other department is, it led me to be warm up enough to be like ask for help, to ask support, because one day I was like sitting at a bus stop waiting for my to kind of get home, and then coworkers saw me and they're like, they pull me aside in the office. They're like, hey, you like, I noticed that you just like, what's like what's going on here? Like I could just ask you for give ride and whatever. And then it kind of led me to the opportunity to actually open up and self-advocate for myself in places I wouldn't have. And for me, it's like kind of navigating to different spaces. I think in my current role now, like working for the Society of America, where on day one they just pretty much ask directly what I actually need and how they can support me. It's like kind of building a service mentality where you're a leadership, where how can I support you type of mentality, where it's always like, I'm here to support you to do your best work, and like to make things as simple as possible for you, like in a way to accomplish your needs and to kind of help empower your employees to like be able to work productivity and offer them flexibility and openness and stuff like that, and be willing to learn. I think the most important aspect of it is the psychological safety and like neuroaffirming, because like most of the times like this employee with disability have faced a lot of bullying growing up, or mental health challenges or trauma growing up. So of course they're coming into a place, a work environment where, hey, they don't want to get traumatized again. So it's a place where they can feel safe and feel seen and accepted for who they are, and maybe, you know, like help them find allies or support where people like they can connect with, or like people they connect with, and make the transition as possible as well. And that requires a lot of trainings and like incorporation for employees who are new to this space or new to this understanding of disability and neurodiversity. So you kind of have to kind of have that all together. And I think it's like it's all these components combined. But most importantly, I think like if we kind of take care of the mental health and safety aspect of it, I think is key to that.
Very well said. Ola or Ryan?
Ryan, did you want to go?
You go for it.
Thank you.
Didn't say,
So,
I said that all. Yeah. Anyway, you guys.
so in your job descriptions, take out heavy lifting,
Mhm.
offer ASL and cart services, anything that would attract disabled people to come work for you. And in your office, every month, whether it be on the 1st or 31st, send out an email reminding staff members of who they can go to for disability accommodations. And I'll just be honest, a lot of disabled people are in denial. It took me 2 years into being a wheelchair user. I was in my 20s. I was in deep denial. I know people who've been wheelchair users since they were toddlers who still don't identify as disabled. So it's very important to use, include disability, but also other phrases like chronically ill, or neurodivergent, or, mental health, all those things, and make sure it's every month that people are reminded who they can go to. I'll speak about a personal experience of mine. I faced the biggest difficulty in my consideration of getting a job after college. Glamour magazine had named me among the top 10 most influential college women in the country, and I still couldn't get a job for almost a year. I was so afraid. In the Glamour magazine photo shoot, you don't see me in my wheelchair, and the photographer was kind of upset that I refused to be photographed in it. And I was like, "You don't understand. I won't be able to get a job." I was like, I'm even afraid to put that I had a heart transplant and a kidney transplant in this, like, because I'm like, this is gonna make things worse for me. And it got to the extent where I was parking my wheelchair in another part of an office building, whether it be the stairwell, hiding it just for interviews. And so the way those things can change is creating affinity groups, for people with disabilities in that job, separating disability accommodations from human resources, so people don't feel like there will be reprisal or they'll be punished for an accommodation. Those are very simple things that can be done to make the workplace more inclusive and make people more comfortable asking for accommodations.
On the recruiting and hiring side, there's so much about that a process that is just a nightmare for disabled employees. For example, I hate, underline, bold, hate t- a timed, a recorded a video. Hang on, video. Wait for it in the chat. Coming in. 3, 2, 1. If I can type. Those. They are a huge a source of anxiety and stress. If you can get the applicant, live or in a person, I am 100 times a better in a real time than in a recorded setting. That and then making sure that the same accommodations and mods you would offer your employees at work are available to your applicants, and don't hide that behind some like legalese, a disclaimer. Like, I'd be proud to be accommodating. So that.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. It's hugely important. I know we're at time and I want to leave a little space for us to wrap up here, but inclusion starts when candidates are applying, right? And to Ryan's excellent point, and others have hit on this too, like, you know, you need to be asking, can we support you differently in the recruiting process? Like thinking about, you know, do people need to send questions? Is it a good idea to send questions ahead of time so everyone has the same opportunities to prepare and think through? You know, really thinking about, why are you putting a hard turnaround on a take-home assignment if that's going to cause undue stress and pressure and is not going to be equitable to some people? So again, there, you know, as Jessie and I said at the beginning, this conversation is so not had. And so there was so much to cover. And I really just am so grateful, Ola, to you, Ola, and Ryan and Dennis, because you know, I just thank you for giving us your time and energy to share your personal stories with us. It really means a lot to me, and I know it has meant a lot to the people in the chat and in this room. You all are doing amazing things in the world, and I'm just so honored to know each of you. So with that, Jessie, do you want to add anything on your end? And then maybe we can formally close, and if some of us want to hang out, we can. Or if others have to run, we can do that too.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Whoa, I have like pages of notes. This has been really, I've learned a ton, so I'm very grateful. The chat has been on fire. And community at Culture First lives in a lot of different places. Obviously, we have these Culture First gatherings that happen online and in person as well, but there's also a People Geek Slack community if you're not in there. And I know that there are some member resource groups as well, but I believe there is one around disability. But so if you're not in People Geek Slack, definitely check that out if you want to keep the convo going over the digital forum, and just continue to stay involved with us. It sounds like we could keep going with lots of different, there's so much intersectionality here, so we could continue the conversation so many different ways, but this has been a treat. Thank you all so much. We'll make sure this recording gets up as well if you want to share with friends and colleagues and things like that. But I'll hand it back to you, Emily, to keep the convo going. Thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah, and if people need to jump, feel free to jump. And we'll, Ola, Ryan, Dennis, if you all need to jump too, I don't want to take up your time, but we can, let me just highlight a few of the questions that I saw come up in the chat. A lot of them, honestly, the theme is not surprising to me. A lot of them have been around leadership hesitancy and executives not being on board. And I think, you know, I feel very personally strong about this. It's hard for me to answer this question. You know, data honestly is, I think that's why I think the Culture Amp data set that we showed earlier. And I think Jessie, somebody said they were going to even look into it more, right? Your head of research was on here. But yeah, using the data to show, you know, within your population, how people don't feel seen, to Ola's point earlier, you know, bringing up the very true fact of this year, I can pull this data and we can send it out in the resources, but lawsuits from the EEOC, and Ola, you may know this, like ADA, under the ADA, like this year, the highest, like the most frequent lawsuit under that the EEOC has pursued has been people not handling accommodation processes correctly. So, you know, if data from your employees doesn't speak to your leadership, to Ola's point, there's a very real cost to not handling accommodations appropriately or not creating a safe environment.
And with the pandemic, it's just going to increase. Like the reality is there are a lot of people living with long COVID and they're in the workforce and they don't want to leave the workforce. They just want to be accommodated. So you can either continue being sued or recognize that this was a massive disabling event and you're going to need to get with the times or get left.
Yes. There's a really good question in the chat about Any advice for what leaders can do to be more inclusive and open specifically to people with non-apparent or disabilities or neurodivergence? Dennis, you want to lead us off since you're the expert here? So any specific tips on how to be more inclusive of neurodiversity as a leader?
I think it's like what I learned kind of like recently more. So like your capacity is like kind of neuroaffirming. It's kind of being able to like be more proactive in this space where it's like, just let people be and just kind of embrace like people's differences and like providing that safe space for people and the psychological safety for them to just be and that openness and just having that, like providing different accommodation, maybe needing a sensory room where like they need time to cool off during the day and like kind of just had to kind of rest up and like educating yourself on neurodiversity is very important. It's like kind of me like kind of find like support group like ERG groups and like or even like thought leaders in a space or like in your own community wherever you're at. There's different groups like kind of providing that education training and kind of partnering with those organizations is a kind of better way to kind of support your employees in those space where they are in a place where they may not be able to disclose or maybe they be undiagnosed, for example. Like for myself, like I would like identify in my late 20s. So, like a lot of folks are maybe masking and they're high mass. And so like as you mentioned, like a lot of like folks with like autism, neurodivergent, or like, disability gone through a lot of years of trauma and like conscious bias or internalized ableism. So of course it's gonna hit them very hard. So it's like by providing that safe space and a place where they can just be themselves and be able to open up about who they are is like very key. And and the workplace is probably maybe the only place that they have this safe space in. And if you could be that place for them, then that's great. And I think that's what you can do for them is like to expose them to the different type of support system that they may not be exposed to. And for me, it's like I learned what a healthy environment looked like because I was in one neurofirm space most the past 2 years of my life. But I wasn't exposed to that at all because what we kind of grew up with is what we kind of know as what considered is healthy and good for us. But then as we kind of go through life, we don't necessarily know that. And so we sometimes end up in toxic work culture, toxic environment because we think that, oh, it's totally normal, totally healthy. But then once you kind of go through it, it's like a lot of like folks project into trauma and it kind of like create that culture of like, is it trauma informed or like not psychologically safe? Because like even in disability space itself, like or even in other between neurodivergent, it's also like these spaces aren't like as sometimes I've been in these spaces and they aren't as neurofirm or they aren't like that healthy. But then you have to understand that um every person is different. Every person needs are very different. So you have to kind of like be open to collaborating with them and open to kind of getting to know like the individual you're working with and kind of have cater type of support system for everyone's need and their differences as well. And just taking the time and curiosity to learn more about your employees on an individual basis as a human, to kind of get to know them to kind of best support them.
Amazing.
Well, that too. Oh, sorry, you had.
No, please go, Ryan. Please go.
No, I think this goes back to not being scared to talk about it or ask the odd questions that you have. I can understand how for a leader who hasn't had a differently able to employee before, how that can be uh daunting or even scary. It, shouldn't be, but right now our society makes it so. But the quickest way out of that is just to talk about it. Ask, hey, how can I support you? That one odd question solely can break down so much of the unknown in a stereotype that we face. So I mean, just I'll start with those conversations.
Yep. Be curious. Love it.
Yeah.
Ola, you want to take us home with the last point?
Yes.
Give us our mic drop.
This started before I became, a grown woman and working, but in high school, I always got particularly from one of my teachers, I would often be late to class because I had a short walking ability, and they would actually reduce my grades as a late penalty. And he was like, "You had a heart transplant how many years ago? You're fine now." That constant of, you know, I can't tell, so you look fine, so I'm just gonna judge you based on your looks. And so my advice is to stop asking for doctor's notes. There is no doctor's note that's going to explain neurodiversity to you. Disabled people don't need to continue to go to the doctor to prove to you that they need certain accommodations. And there's only but so much we as disabled employees can do to inspire you to open your mind. That onus is specifically on you and your responsibility as an employer to, and as a coworker, to challenge your own prejudices. And so I often advise people to read memoirs by, famous people with disabilities. One of my friends, her name is Haben Girma. She's the first she's the first blind and deaf person to graduate from Harvard Law. I advise people, I was like, this is an attorney. This is what an attorney looks like. Blind, deaf, and comes into court with her service dog, service animal. So when you think the possibilities are limited for people with disabilities, you need to look at these examples. One of my mentors, her name is Claudia Gordon. She is the first deaf Black woman attorney in the United States. She worked in the Obama White House and as an advisor to President Obama, and she tells this one story about when she knew she wanted to go to law school, and it was when she was in college, and her university told her she had to pay for her own interpreters, which is illegal. Um, and so she wanted to go to law school, understand the law, interpret it, and make it so disabled people's rights are protected. Um, I encourage you to do more than just judge a book by its cover, but read the stories of disabled people who work in equal employment, who work in employment advocacy and accessibility, and challenge yourself about what disability looks like. Because if you were to look at Claudia Gordon, you wouldn't be able to tell because she was a Tommy Hilfiger model. She actually had a huge billboard in Times Square. When you look at her, you can't tell that she's deaf. So.
And with that nugget of wisdom, or maybe 500 nuggets of wisdom, we're going to wrap up. And yeah, please, I think one of the things that was just ringing through to me from all of your comments is, there is a saying, nothing for us without us, right? And that's exactly what Ola was just hitting on. Do not, if you want to work on being more inclusive for people with disabilities in your workplace, involve them, read their stories, invite them to speak, ask for their opinions. With that, thank you, our panelists. We're going to wrap up. There we go. Jessie's changing our screen, but thank you all so much for attending. We will be in touch with resources and data, and please reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to chat more. Thank you so much for coming.
So amazing. Cheers to
Thanks,
co-creating a
guys.
better world of work. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.